you can't have a low enough opinion of certain Western leaders.
This was 15 9/11s, essentially, proportional to the population of Israel.
The IAF do not just carpet bomb Gaza. If they did, they'd be killing a lot of Gazans.
Islamophobia seems like it's a made-up term.
I think that's delusional.
How do you function? If your entire life is grievance.
Do you actually have a three-state solution?
Is it the case that Europe is just absorbing more immigration than it can handle?
I think it's a rather bleak future in Europe.
I will say, doing episodes like this, it does make me a little bit nervous sometimes, because it's hard to cover stuff like the conflicts and things like that without making people angry. And it's not just that. I've noticed that people interpret things through a lens that feels good to them, not necessarily through a lens about what was actually said.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I know that you've experienced this. I did an episode on anti-Semitism. The largest volume of feedback I got was, why aren't you talking about Israel bombing the Palestinians? And I was just like, okay.
Sure.
The first thing I said was, I don't want to cover the war in this episode because it's separate from the general concept of anti-Semitism. And people were like, but what about Israel bombing the Palestinians? And I was like, do you realize you're proving my point about conflating Jewish people all over the world with a war in Israel? And it's completely lost on even well-meaning, well-intentioned people. Some are not,
Sure.
not everyone's like that, but I try to compare. Americans should know better than that. Brits should know better than that. If it were kosher to target Americans and Brits because of stuff our militaries did overseas, we would all be dead by now.
For sure.
We would all be dead by now. You start your latest book with saying something along the lines of, sometimes a flare goes up and you find out where everyone is standing. Tell me what you mean by that. I like that opening.
Well, I think there are occasions when something happens in the world, an atrocity or an event, and yes, you see everyone's colors, you see where everybody is. I start on Democracies and Death Cults with that observation because that was how I felt on the morning of the 7th of October, and particularly the day after, on the 8th. And that's because on the evening of the 7th of October, there are already anti-Israel protests in many major cities, including London. And on the 8th of October, as I described in the opening of the book, I went down to Times Square here in New York, and there was a pro-Hamas, pro-slaughter protest going on as the slaughter was still going on. So I think at those moments, you know where people are standing.
You explain this quite well in the book, that 9/11 was really this triggering event for the United States, of course, brought us into a couple of conflicts, a couple of wars. This was 15 9/11s, essentially, with proportional to the population of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And Canada and the UK, do you happen to remember the proportions that this was?
I remember the
It's
proportion
quite significant.
for, just to fill out that point, because sometimes people deliberately misunderstand this or can't understand it, but Israel's a country of about 9 million people, and this country, America, is about 330 million. Mm-hmm. So 1,200 people were slaughtered in one morning in Israel, and another 250 taken hostage. If you were to do those, extrapolate out those numbers to America, it's somewhere in the region of 44,000 Americans being killed in one day, and
Wow.
It's 10,000 being taken hostage. And partly the reason I say that is not just to demonstrate the magnitude of the massacre of the 7th, but to stress that this is something where almost everybody in the country was affected in some way. Mm. Everyone was 1 or 2 degrees of separation from the story of the morning when it was going on. In the same way that if you had that magnitude of horror, we've had horror in this city and other cities around the world, but if you had that magnitude of horror, even bigger than 9/11 style attacks, multiple 9/11 style attacks, it would be something which everybody in America had some kind of connection to.
That's true. On the day of and the day after, I reached out to a couple friends of mine that lived here, and Jewish people that I knew that growing up and things like that. And they were saying, like, my dentist was kidnapped, my dentist's daughter is gone, my cousin's gone, my brother was shot. It was just almost everybody who I knew had Israeli family or friends, they were personally affected. So you're right. It's like when I was in University of Michigan. There's a lot of New Yorkers that go there. And it was like, oh, is your family okay? And it was like, no, my cousin worked in World Finance, or no, my dad's a police officer. I mean, it was just like everybody who was from New York. You know, you say, oh, is your family okay? And you expect the answer to be, yeah, I'm fine. It was an earthquake in Taiwan. You know, oh, yeah, we were at the hotel. The water shook in the glasses. This was not that, right? This was like, they're still missing. And it's to even now that most of the hostages were, you know, not doing so well. Some of them are still missing. Some of these family members of my friends are still missing. And you describe this well in the opening chapters of the book. This just pure nightmare fuel describing the attacks. We don't have to go into the details here, but you make the point that even Nazis tried to hide atrocities, but Hamas boasted and their allies celebrated. I thought that was an interesting distinction because I hadn't really ever thought about that. You know, when my family says, oh, your aunt and uncle, or my mom's aunt and uncle were killed in the Holocaust, they had to dig for the records. It wasn't like it wasn't a television commercial with their name on it, right? It was something that they were missing for a long time. And then we just kind of figured out what happened.
Yes. I mean, this is why, you know, I've said before, hell's a bottomless pit. It's not a competition, you know, who's the worst Nazi or who's the worst bastard or whatever. It's just that I think there was something from the get-go that was very striking, which was that the people who committed the atrocities on the 7th were boasting about it. They were proud of it. They were live streaming it. They had GoPros. They were using their iPhones. They were using WhatsApp video and so on. So this was being broadcast in real time because many, if not all, of the people who participated in Hamas's atrocities and Islamic Jihad's atrocities, they wanted the world to know, which is, again, is not a competition. It's just it's another level of horror and terror that people would actually be proud of, you know, kidnapping a grandmother or killing children. There's a quote that's become quite famous that I cite in the book of a young man from Gaza who phones back to his home on the phone of the Jewish woman he's just murdered and is saying to his father, you know, your son has killed 10 Jews. In my own hands, I've killed Jews. Get mother on the line. That's uncommon, actually. A lot of people throughout history have done terribly wicked things. But to do wicked things and want everyone to know about it.
Like call your mom to tell her, hey, you'll never guess what I just did. Like you just aced your chemistry exam.
Right.
It's crazy to me.
Yes. But they wanted the world to know. And one of the many odd things about our era is that you can then see the phenomenon of people who can at the same time keep in their head that they did do that. They did film it. And that somehow it didn't happen.
It also didn't happen, yeah, exactly.
Or that it was done by the Jews, but there are people who can keep two contradictory ideas in their head at once.
So I wonder what you think about that, because this is, whenever I see these discussions online, they'll say something like, well, tell that to the 1,200 people that Hamas killed. Like, this is a mostly peaceful resistance movement. Israel's the real bad guy. And it's like, okay, I understand your perspective here. I suppose they disagree with it. You know, but they killed 1,200 people on October 7th. Well, most of those were killed by Israeli helicopters. And it's like, well, okay, why were the helicopters there? Why were the soldiers there? Like, let's even take the most generous interpretation of your argument, which is that the soldiers killed people, let's say even deliberately so that they wouldn't be taken hostage, or accidentally because they couldn't tell who was who. If a bank is hijacked by bank robbers and the police kill a bunch of hijackers and also kill a few hostages, we don't blame the police for the massacre that occurred at the bank. We blame the hostage takers who tried to rob the bank and take hostages. Yeah. But that is just not this did not apply to this particular situation for some reason.
Well, no, as I say, because people, particularly people who just hate Israel or want to find reasons to hate Israel, will hold all these contradictory views in their head at once. They will say, we want more October the 7th, and our side didn't do October the 7th. It was the Israelis who did it, but we'd like to do it.
Right.
I mean, that's I always think as an example. I've got plenty of examples of it I've come across in my life. I think all the time of somebody I knew who interviewed the father of the main the lead hijacker on 9/11, and Mohammed Atta. His father lived in Jordan. And when this person went to interview the father, he found out that the father of Mohammed Atta, who flew the first plane in the World Trade Center, both believed that his son was a shaheed, a martyr, and that 9/11 had been done by the Jews.
So it's just, I mean, I'm speechless, because you would think that after a second, that would come out of your mouth, and then you would go, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. And yet this man lives, this is his life. Like these two parallel tracks run in his brain to infinity and beyond.
Yeah, and I mean, in a way, it's a little bit more understandable in his situation. I suppose his son is dead, and he's trying to find some kind of rationales for having produced an atrocity as a child. But one of the things that's just so interesting is that so many people have become completely deranged along these lines who have no dog in the fight. I mean, that is curious.
That part to me, this is what I'm dealing with lately. Is I'm more or less centrist, I thought, but the brick of left and right, it's been cast so far left that even if I haven't moved, it looks like I've just gone straight right and without with speed. And I realized my beliefs really haven't changed. It's that I thought I was over here center left, but it turns out that I'm actually nowhere near that. I thought left ended about here. It goes all the way to Brooklyn. It just doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, not literally. Sorry, Brooklyners. I'm not painting you with a broad brush. I just mean it's so much further than I thought.
Sure. I mean, think of the way in which just in the last 2 years, there has been almost impossibility on the anti-Israel side to delineate between being consistent in the argument that the Palestinians should have another state or have a two-state solution or whatever, and support for Hamas. I think that what was once, and indeed in our lifetimes, a very crucial distinction on the pro-Palestinian side outside of the region has become immeasurably blurred, so that at Princeton University the other week, there were chants by the students in the main quadrangle of "Glory to our martyrs." What is our doing there?
Yeah, that's
who are the martyrs of Princeton? They mean Hamas. They mean the leadership of Hamas. They mean Yahya Sinwar. They mean Hassan Nasrallah, the now dead head of Hezbollah. That is a moral error of unbelievable dimensions.
It doesn't make sense to me. Look, I was an edgy college student, but I don't think I ever went, you know what? I want to support the people I want to support killers on any side. I think for me, I was kind of like, man, universal basic income would be great, huh? Hits blunt, whatever. That was as far as it went. I think for me, the problem I have is the argument, even from people who consider themselves pragmatists, will say, well, you can't bomb an ideology. I don't know. I feel like we bombed Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, and that ideology more or less went away. Not that we don't have Nazi sympathizers, but...
Well, one of the crucial things about that was that, take the case of Imperial Japan. Exactly. I mean, many people said in the 1940s you couldn't defeat them, or at least you couldn't defeat the ideology. It turned out you could. You could defeat it by the emperor being forced to a humiliating and total surrender before his American counterparts. And there are pockets of that ideology in Japan today, but it's not significant.
Yeah, there's Nazis now. They have three teeth and face tats, and they're in prison. It's not the same as
and everybody hates them.
Everybody hates them, right? It's not the same as the Luftwaffe in World War II. No. It's not the same thing.
No, and this is also, I mean, it's something I've written about before, but after the 20th century, we thought we had a pretty good understanding of how the right had got to a fascist ideology in certain countries. There's always a dispute about that among some people on the right, with National Socialism and left. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, once a side starts playing with, dealing in racial supremacy, eradication of minority groups and so on. You can tell that that's some time before that is where they went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 20th century, there was a twin ideology of equal horror, the communism, and no one still to this day has really worked out how you get to the gulag. And that's a profound failing, actually, of our societies. We should have tried to understand in the West by now how our counterparts in Eastern Europe, Russia, elsewhere, parts of the Far East fell into this.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get from it, the center to that? And I think that we have imperfect sort of guides and guardrails to know where the right could go very badly wrong. I think the left has, and I'm not saying this as just a partisan reason. I'm just saying that we ought to know how you get to gulag. We ought to know, if we understand that the right can start dealing in violence and how they do it, why haven't we worked out where the left does?
That's the thing. To me, I try to engage in good faith online or with friends of mine that have different beliefs. And some of the people online, of course, are radical leftists. And I'll say something like, well, gulags existed and these were just as bad as anything we had on the right in many ways. And the arguments they range from, well, okay, like a concession, or to the crazy. Well, if you were in a gulag, you could make a good living for yourself if you just did the right. Do you hear? If they deport your entire family to Siberia and take away all your possessions and make you break rocks in a coal mine until you die, you can still make a good living for yourself. That's just like, you're right. Hell is a bottomless. It's a bottomless pit. Yeah, it doesn't. None of it makes sense to me. The conflicting ideas that people can hold in their heads, it makes. What do you make of that? Because it makes me lose a little bit of hope, because it's like you're not thinking clearly. We're never going to get through to these people.
Well, I mean, if you're in the business of ideas, of course, you never want to give up on people entirely.
No.
And you never want to give up entirely, or indeed to any significant extent, on the power of facts and reason to alter somebody's erroneous opinion or view.
That's what we do here. It's just that we can only talk to the people who aren't on the fringes, because those people won't even tune in.
But I do think that people who do deal in this currency often ignore the deeper and sometimes more powerful currents that also pull people. I mean, I mentioned this in The War on the West, but consider the extraordinary extent to which, say, irrational resentment can power a person's life. Resentment is one of the deepest human instincts, human emotions. And if you live a life caught up in resentment, that can drive you. I mean, it'll drive you to hell, but I mean, it'll drive you. That person has something I don't. There must be a reason why he's got it and I don't. These people, I mean, going back to the Israel thing, that's a very powerful thing in the Middle East, in particular neighboring Arab countries, which is how come this country has a tiny percent of our population, tiny percent of the amount of land we have, and has made a much more successful economy and civil society from it, and it's got religious freedom that we don't, or whatever, whichever way you want to do it. Mm-hmm. One explanation for the extraordinary anti-Israel animus in the region is that people often feel resentment against their neighbor if their neighbor is doing better. Mm-hmm. And that's that you can't just reason somebody out of that.
Yeah.
Because they weren't reasoned into it.
Yes. There's a quote, like, never try to reason somebody out of a belief they emotioned.
It's Jonathan Swift, the Irish satirist, never try to reason somebody out of a position they weren't reasoned into.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, I love that, but of course the uncomfortable truth is he nailed that one, right? And it's like, how do we fix or get rid of some of these ideologies? I mean, are there risks when democracies fight such ideologies? I mean, we have proportionality that we're worried about now, civilian casualties, things like that. You do mention this in the book. I'm curious what you think.
Oh, those are profound questions which all Western armies have to deal in. People like to do extrapolation out of civilian death tolls and so on, and it's pretty hard to go into that for most people without sounding in some way heartless. But war is a terrible force, and inevitably innocent civilians die once a war is going on. There are rules of engagement that the Israeli Defense Forces, like the American Army, the British Army, engage in, and there's a certain I mean, again, this is something so obvious, but it has to be said. I mean, the IDF, the IAF do not just carpet bomb Gaza, because if they did, they would be failing to hit the Hamas terrorists that they want, and they'd be killing a lot of Gazans who they have no interest in killing. They don't want to. I've become slightly jaded about this particular part of the argument, because I realize that there are people who just don't want to hear that, because they've imbibed for almost 2 years now the claim that the Israelis are deliberately committing genocide, or that indeed they were committing genocide before the 7th of October in Gaza, which I mean it's all preposterous as a claim. One of the, again, going back to the reason thing, is why do so many people seem to want that to be the case? And I say that carefully. I think a lot of people do want that to be the case. I just saw yesterday a big protest that was happening in Amsterdam yesterday against Israel. So let me throw it out there. Why might the Dutch want to accuse the one Jewish state of genocide? It's not hard to work out psychologically.
Right.
If you've been brought up in Amsterdam and you've passed Anne Frank's house many times and been taken around it, and you know that your forebears collaborated, failed to stand up to Nazi fascism, and colluded to a very great extent in the deportation and murder of the Jews of that country, yeah, you would love it to have the opportunity to accuse the Jewish state of genocide, because then everyone's done genocide and we can be let off in the Netherlands. And that's a very significant driver for some people. In the same way, again, going back to the thing that's beneath or beyond reason, it seems that there are a lot of people who don't have very much, I don't want to be needlessly insulting, seek purpose and meaning in their life. They want a grand story to be a part of. And they, particularly some young people, the stats show that in America and the wider West, have decided to hitch themselves to a big cause. And the big cause that some of them have decided to hitch themselves to is the cause of Palestinianism, and then down the road from that, the cause of Hamas, Hezbollah, and so on. It seems to give them purpose. It certainly gives them something to do. They get the great opportunity of saying, no one will be free until this happens. And I think that's delusional, but again, it's understandable. There are significant numbers of people, evidently, clearly, in our societies in the West who deeply lack meaning in their lives and wish to attach themselves to things that seem meaning-filled. And the great cause of liberation, for instance, liberation of oppressed people, is a cause. And unfortunately, significant numbers of people have decided to attach themselves to the anti-Israel cause in the belief that that is a cause on the side of people who need liberation, of course, assisted by white people in the West who would normally be accused of either colonialist thinking or of white savior complex. But as we know, again, those charges don't happen if they go in a certain direction.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. And I found that something else that was quite interesting. I've been to Egypt before a long time ago. I've been to Israel before. I've been to Gaza before. It was the year 2000. So it was before all this.
Before the withdrawal.
Before the withdrawal. And when I was in Gaza, I found it to be, I was staying with a lovely family. The father worked for the Palestinian Authority, but they had a Hamas flag in their house that was up on the wall. I had my own floor because they didn't want the girls in the house to see me without my shirt on and stuff. And the brothers had their own room and another floor, and the parents had their own floors. Quite a nice house, and the roof was open. We'd all hang out on the roof at night and eat these giant trays of olives and all this stuff. It was quite memorable. And I remember asking if I could take a picture of the guy holding the Hamas flag because I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was an interesting looking flag, and I thought it was in the. And then the brother said, "No, don't take a photo of it." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, my dad works for the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas is like the other political party." And I said, "Well, how do you have both flags? How can your dad work for that? Is he going to get mad if you know?" No, my dad knows that he's secretly we're pro Hamas, but he works for the PA, and I found that to be really confusing. Although it made way more sense, of course, over the last 25 years, learned quite a bit about this. And the idea that you could be sort of complicit in one but secretly rooting for the other was very, very common.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that it was never anything that went wrong. I mean anything. Like I remember one of the brothers stubbed his toe, and he said something, and I said, why do you say, what is that word? Because I thought he was swearing in Arabic. And the sister goes, "Oh, he said damn Jews." And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, "Oh, he says that whenever he like drops something, kicks something." And I said, does everyone say that? And he said, "No, it's kind of, we do, but not everybody. There's other words to swear in Arabic." And then there was a bad smell one day because the wind has changed. And they said, "Oh, it's the wastewater treatment plant. Usually it blows that way, and then it blows this way, but we want it to blow towards the Jews." And my friend Netanya, who is Jewish and friends with these people, that's how I got to go there in the first place, she was like, "Can you stop doing that? You know, it's making me uncomfortable. We're Jewish too." And they were like, "It's so hard to break these habits because this is how everyone talks." And that was shocking to me. I had a Hebrew textbook because I was learning Hebrew. And they said, "Can you put that away? It's offensive." And I was like, "It's just Hebrew language." And the one brother's like, "It's fine. I'll help you with your homework. I speak Hebrew too." But he and my brother and my dad and my mom, they all got offended by just even seeing that. And that to me is like, it just really signifies how much hatred there was. If you can't even see, imagine your country's at war with Iraq and you see Arabic written on a menu in New York and you storm out of the place. "Sir, what's wrong? I can't believe there's Arabic on this menu." I mean, at some point it's like you got to get it together. How do you function? If your entire life is grievance, how do you get anything done?
Well, you don't.
You don't.
You don't. You spend your time trying to bring down the person who you think is causing you all of these problems in your life. And again, as I quoted in The War in the West, as Nietzsche famously says in The Genealogy of Morals, when you're in that position, you do need somebody to stand over your life and say, "You're right, there is somebody holding you back. There is somebody who's destroying your life. The person is you." Yeah. Not many people want to audition for the role of saying that to people, let alone to Gazans in the 2000s.
Well, ironically, these kids, the reason we were able to go there, my friend knew her because my friend Netanya was this woman's floor mate in a university in the United States where all of them had gone to school. So they were educated in the U.S., from Gaza, from Rafah. So this isn't even like, well, they've never seen anything outside of their little city. They've never they've never had any advantages. No, they had passports. They vacationed in London and New York.
Yeah, that doesn't necessarily inoculate you to hatreds.
No, I thought that was really interesting because my whole life had been taught the more you're exposed to things, the more everyone gets along.
I remember,
those days?
I remember speaking to somebody from the PA in Ramallah many years ago when I was there, who explained to me that, he'd studied at the London School of Economics and he came back in order to pursue his fantasy of anti-Israelism, having spent, 3 years in London, and as it happened, he swam in warm enough waters at the London School of Economics. But again, we seem to have an idea or a presumption, which maybe we both had at some point, that if not now, that Western societies can inoculate people to irrational bigotries. That's clearly not true. It's clearly not true. It may work with some people, but there'll be a lot of people who it makes no difference to at all.
One strange tension, I wanted to ask you this because I'd never gotten an answer to this. When I was in Egypt, people really hated Israelis. I mean, it was like, hey, what are you guys doing here? Are you tourists? Oh, yeah, I'm studying in Israel and I came here on a trip. And they're like, oh, okay, well, you should say Palestine because, anyway, let's go to this bar and they serve alcohol and I don't drink, but I know you guys probably do and we can play pool. I mean, that was the conversations I was having. And I remember that I was talking with someone and I said, why is everyone still so angry about Israel? Is it because you lost the war in 1973? And the guy goes, what are you talking about? And I said, the 1973 war, you lost, is everyone, like, why is everyone, we didn't lose. And I'm thinking, wow, you might want to watch the movie again, pal.
As you know, I tell a very similar story in my book. I had exactly the same experience.
That was what flagged it for me. Because I was like, oh my gosh, this wasn't just an isolated incident.
No. They think they won the 6-Day War.
Yeah. You have Google. We had Google. We had Google back then. We had history books back then. What the hell?
Again, our presumption is that if you introduce somebody to the facts, their mind will change. Unfortunately, that is the case with some people, but by no means the case with everybody.
Yeah. Egypt was both phenomenal and scary at the same time.
It's a good description of the country.
Amazing place, people kind of all over the map, really. I mean, there was a waiter that I loved. We were in Dahab. There's a beachside cafe. Have you ever been down there? There's like pillows all over the beach and these little kind of restaurants, and you just sit there and you order food, and like 3 hours later it comes, but you don't care because you're on a vacation and you're looking at the ocean, right? And I remember this waiter was such a nice guy. He was always giving us free stuff, and he's like, try the mango shake. I know you ordered the watermelon, whatever it was. I'm bringing you this, my favorite thing today. Wouldn't let us order. I took half the things off the bill. It's just a really nice guy. And on the last day, he goes, oh, there's Israelis back there. I put the poison in the food so they're going to puke and shit everywhere. And I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, they're going to be so sick in about 20 minutes. Just watch. And I was like, I can't. I have to tell them. And he's like, don't tell them. What's wrong with you? I thought we were friends. I'm like, I can't let you poison somebody at the table behind me because they're Jewish. Like, what are you doing? So I told them and they left. And the guy was like really upset and chasing after. Oh, I didn't mean it. I was just kidding. I don't think he was. But it was so hard to... It was confusing for me, right? Because he knew we were Jewish. He knew we were studying in Israel. And it wasn't a problem. It was nice to us the whole week. 2 Israelis walk in. Hey, I poisoned those 2 Israelis behind you. Set your watch. 20 minutes. They're going to be...
I mean, it's one of the tragedies, in my view, of much of the Arab world, that instead of developing their own societies, the leaders of many of the countries have successfully diverted their populations onto hating Israel because there is no way to improve their own socioeconomic standing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's sad for the Israelis, but it's a disaster for the Arab world.
I just never experienced anything. Look, coming from Michigan, I had never experienced anything like that. That's why it stuck with me for a quarter of a century. But a lot of it was never really explainable until recently. And reading books like yours and thinking like, oh, okay, now I'm certain. Now that we're being bombarded with the information about this conflict and its history, a lot of this makes a little bit more sense. I want to ask, and this is a loaded question and a leading one, so I'll admit that at first. But why does proportionality only seem to apply to Israel? And I don't want to go back to World War II for examples or anything like that, but like I've never heard, I don't even think I'd heard the word proportionality until this conflict. No one seems to really worry about it.
Oh, no, it's been an obsessive term used in every conflict involving Israel for at least this century. Every Gaza conflagration before this last 2 years, the 2006 Lebanon war, it's always been proportionality. First of all, I mean, it's in some ways it's understandable. In one way, it's understandable. A lot of people who don't know anything about the conflict or about the region, or indeed about warfare in general, may have the presumption that your side have 1,200 people killed. You're allowed to retaliate up to the level of the same number on the other side. And if you go beyond that, it's disproportionate. Now, this is, to say this is elementary as a bit of ethical or moral or strategic understanding is to vastly understate the matter. But there are some people who do see it like that, or let's go further along it, who think, although they might not be able to say exactly where the level is, they think they would know what a disproportionate response looked like if they saw it. There is a particular obsession about it whenever it involves Israel. And the most obvious example I would give is when ISIS in the 2010s were rampaging across Iraq and Syria and successfully carrying out mass casualty terror attacks in Europe, particularly most notably in France in 2015. The French government, the British government, the American government, others decided to go in and destroy ISIS. We were very reluctant in all of our countries to put boots on the ground. That was the great thing everyone was always discussing. Are we going to put boots on the ground? And there was a recognition among all these countries that they didn't want to get dragged into that. So all of our countries did considerable aerial campaigns, bombing places like Mosul, where ISIS were governing. And they also we also used our Kurdish allies, Peshmerga and others, to be the front phalanx of the ground campaign. There was some special forces assistance, but it was mainly the fighting was done by the Kurds. We just don't know how many civilians were killed. We just don't know. Tens of thousands for sure.
We don't know because we decided not to count? Is that kind of why?
Nobody counted because nobody, frankly, cared. They wanted to stop people going into music concerts in Paris and slaughtering people by the hundreds. So, and ISIS were Hamas-like, very similar Islamist ideology and theology. And we decided that the priority was destroying ISIS. There are some people who have a problem with that, but I don't think very many people do. And although the so-called anti-war movements in the West that tend to be pro-war but pro the other side winning as long as it's not us or our allies, occasionally will talk about that. But that issue did not close down major cities in the US or shut down capital cities in Europe week after week. So my question always on that is just so why is it that the case with Israel? And I think there are very deep reasons. In fact, you saw them by the 8th of October when the massacre was still going on in the south of Israel, when Hamas was still, and other terrorists were all still rampaging through the country. The world's media turned on the 8th of October onto how is Israel going to take revenge? I think that's a very deep substrate in our societies, which is the idea of the vengeful Jews, the vengeful Jewish state, an eye for an eye, all that sort of thing. It's very, you see it even in reputable media like Private Eye, the satirical magazine in the UK. They all fall into that. The BBC, all these media of different sides fall into that trope. And by the way, of course, there is there's an added oddity to that, which is not just, as I've seen with my own eyes, the considerable efforts that the Israelis go to stop excessive civilian casualties. And I mean, there are people who've done the studies on this, and I find it persuasive that yes, the Israelis have been as targeted as they can be in an extremely difficult battle situation. But I have noticed the number of people who seem not to realize, among other things, that because Israel is so small and its landmass so small and its population so small compared to basically any of its neighbors, it would be understandable if they acted disproportionately, although they don't in civilian numbers terms. But it would be understandable if they couldn't take the one-to-one ratio of you kill one of ours, we kill one of yours. Because very swiftly its neighbors would work out that you can destroy Israel very easily in that case. Right. Very easily.
9 million? Well, we're willing to sacrifice 9 million. I don't know.
And it's not like this hasn't happened repeatedly. You know, I mean, some people listening may know this, others may not. But I mean, what is the first thing that happens after the State of Israel is declared in 1948? All its neighbors invade and try to strangle it at birth. When the population of Israel is about 800,000 people. many of whom had just survived World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, there were more attempts in the next decades, 67, 73, the Intifadas, and then October the 7th. It's not like there can be much trust from the Israeli side that people in the region do not want to annihilate and strangle and destroy the country wholesale. And again, it's what I describe as the unbelievable presumptuousness of people who've been born in societies like the one we're sitting in and born in peace into a society which, for all the problems we have, we live in peace. There's such presumptuousness of people who think they know what they would do in a state of war. They don't. They've no damn idea.
Yeah, that's a common argument that I see from people is, I would do this and this and this. Dude, you live in Ohio. You are in no Michigan is not going to invade anytime soon.
But this has been a perennial for a long time. You mentioned 9/11 earlier. I remember when Osama bin Laden was finally killed in Abbottabad in Pakistan. There was such outrage in the non-American Western media that the Navy SEALs had killed bin Laden and that they had failed to catch him alive, and then, having failed to catch him alive and killing him, had buried him at sea with the risk that he had not been given a full and proper and decent Islamic burial. Okay, now that is wild. And I remember being on the main BBC discussion show when just after that happened, and sure enough, everyone else on the show was talking about their concern about the operation, the malevolence or otherwise of the Navy SEALs for killing bin Laden, and then the appalling ignorance and lack of suitable cultural understanding that might have been demonstrated by this country in potentially not having given the murderer of 3,000 Americans appropriate burial rites. And I was like, have you all lost sight of the plot?
Yeah,
But it's beyond that. It's again, I mean, it's this presumption that so many people have, this presumptuousness, that they would know how to go into Abbottabad in the middle of the night, land the helicopter, enter the bin Laden family compound, ask them all to kindly step this way, not lose your own life, not lose your comrades, and make sure that, I mean, it's just a tiny soupçon. It's a tiny example of something which, when it's applied to Israel, is applied in spades, which is just this endless, like you know, I've had a challenge out since the start of this conflict when I've said to people who think that they understand the conflict, think that they, you know, by being, you know, let's just say fanatically anti-Israel, that they are at the heart of this and understand it. I say the same thing. Okay, going back to where we started, 10,000 Americans are stolen today from Manhattan, and they're taken into neighboring New Jersey, and they're dispersed across the territory. And the territory has been built up for 18 years to have an unbelievably complex and intricate and well-dug set of tunnels underneath New Jersey, and all of the hospitals are used as sites for storing weapons, and all of the mosques and all of the schools and all of the UN sites that are there all have tunnel entrances in them and caches of arms and much more. How do you get your 10,000 American hostages out from New Jersey with minimal civilian harm to any innocent civilian in New Jersey? Tell me your plan. Or for that, for that matter, show me your battle plan for how you would have done Gaza after the 7th. How would you have got the 250 hostages back home, and how would you have killed or captured all the leadership of Hamas who are responsible for this, and make sure Hamas could not run the Gaza again? And I have yet to hear a plan. I hear people saying, so just finally, I hear people saying things like, well, if you notice the hostage negotiations, the hostage releases have come as a result of negotiation. Is something I hear from some people. And I said, you've no idea. It does not come because Hamas wakes up one morning, or the leadership wakes up and decides they'd like to hand back some Israelis today. It happens because of intense military pressure on them, their group, their leadership, and then to buy some time, they occasionally release some emaciated Israelis. And so again, what's anyone else's plan for it? And I don't hear any. I don't actually have many people, I think, who've taken me up on that seriously. And I think it's because they're not serious. They're not actually serious about it.
A lot of people say, well, if Israel would release the Palestinian prisoners that they have, then they would get the hostages back. But I don't remember that ever, first of all, seriously being on the table. It was, we're going to take these prisoners back, and then they're going to join Hamas, and then we're going to do October 7th again. That's what we're going to do. I remember them saying pretty much exactly that.
Yes.
It wasn't you release all our people, we'll release all yours, and then we'll live in peace, and everything will be fine. That was not ever on the table.
No, and the Palestinian prisoners who will be released in the current framework of that's going on as we speak, the 20 or so remaining hostages from Israel who are believed to be alive will be released along with the bodies of around 30 dead Israelis who Hamas and other jihadist groups in Gaza have been holding on to. And just think about that for a second.
Yeah.
Imagine holding a dead body, perhaps for 2 years, because you believe it to be valuable as bartering down the road. That's a pretty sick place to start with. But but as you know, these dead bodies and remaining living hostages are due to be released, and I hope to God they are, in exchange for hundreds and hundreds of convicted terrorists. And this is an incredibly bitter pill to swallow because of two things. One, I don't think that an innocent Israeli who has been snatched from a music festival in the early hours of the morning should be deemed to be worth the value of 100 convicted terrorists or people involved in suicide bomb plots and much more. Stabbing attacks randomly in the street of the kind we saw the other day in, or not that random, but in Manchester, England. Why should those people be released for these innocent hostages? And just finally on that, and as you know, and as I describe in the book, one of the very, very hard to stomach parts of that is that the man who started this latest conflict, Yahya Sinwar, was himself in an Israeli prison for years for murdering Palestinians with his own hands. Mm-hmm. That was why the Israelis imprisoned him. He throttled to death, including using a kafir, that lovely symbol of terrorist chic that so many young Americans seem to have been caught up with, including throttling with a kafir Palestinian. He was imprisoned for this. Yahya Sinwar was released as one of more than 1,000 terrorists in Israeli prisons. He was released in exchange for the one Israeli soldier who had been kidnapped years earlier, Gilad Shalit. So many people on the, as it were, Israeli side of this see that this conflict was started by a man released in just such a prisoner swap, and this conflict seems to be coming to an end with just such a prisoner swap happening again. That is very hard to stomach. And I'm not sure the average American would stomach it if, again, it was America and not Israel that had suffered this barbarism.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. What do you think about the recognition of a Palestinian state from Canada, the UK, and was it France?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Australia.
And Australia. So functionally, well, let me ask you first what your general thoughts on this are, because to me it seems like, I know they wanted to put pressure on Israel, but I don't understand how this does not reward Hamas for October 7th.
Well, of course it rewards Hamas for October 7th. Yeah. And the lesson taken in the region will be that that's how you get stuff out of the Israelis and the Americans, mm-hmm. and so on. Look, the two-state solution has been the shibboleth of left and right, Republicans, Democrats, Labour, Conservatives, so for a couple of generations. And it's the belief that there will be no peace or progression in the Middle East as a region entire unless the Palestinians have another state. Mm. And when I say another state, I'm not being as facetious as some people might think. The population of Jordan is mainly Palestinian. Gaza was effectively a Palestinian-run state from 2005 when the last IDF, the last IDF removed the last even bodies of Jews from Jewish cemeteries in Gaza and made the whole of Gaza Judenrein and handed it over to the Palestinians. Yes, Fatah and Hamas, you were talking about earlier, had a war between them, and Hamas killed their fellow Palestinians by throwing them off buildings and shooting them in the back and much more, dragging their bodies on the back of mopeds and motorbikes through the streets of Gaza. But that was a Palestinian state. It was run by Hamas, horribly run, misgoverned, the subject of unbelievable larceny and theft by the Hamas leadership, who made themselves all billionaires. But it was a Palestinian state. What most people think they mean when they talk about the two-state solution or a Palestinian state is that areas of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, that are largely Palestinian, inhabited by Palestinians, should move from being what is currently the case, which is that they are run by the Palestinian Authority, to being formally recognized as any other country on earth. This has been the status quo position for a long time, that this is desirable. They never have, and the prime ministers of Canada, France, Britain, and Australia have in recent days had no explanation for how you deal with the fact that the Palestinians can't agree on their own leadership, and we don't yet know exactly what's going to happen with running of post-war Gaza. But the Palestinian Authority did not want to run Gaza, so at best you actually have a three-state solution on the table at some point, which is Gaza run by somebody, Israel, and then a Palestinian named state in part of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. And I don't think at the moment it's particularly desirable, because I think that it would be a reward for October the 7th, and I think it would be completely read as that by the Palestinians themselves and their neighbors. But I mean, at the very least, like, not now. But there's so much. People who are watching who haven't spent a lot of their life around politicians or around politicians might have very low opinions of some of them, but you can't have a low enough opinion of certain Western leaders when it comes to this issue, because they simply don't know what they're talking about. They absolutely do not know what they're talking about, and they are dealing in a fantasy that is dead.
Macron started off doing okay. He started off on October 7th being really outspoken, but then when it came time to kind of a year or so on, be like, hey, we're thinking about continuing to prosecute this war. He was well, I need to find balance. I'm not going to show up to the memorial rally for October 7th victims, and then turns around and recognizes a state. It's just, the whole thing is quite confusing.
Well, there's two quick explanations about Macron, for instance. The first is that it's darkly amusing to me that he rolled out the red carpet for the new leader of Syria, who was a member of an Al-Qaeda affiliate until very recently. And it wasn't in his youth either. So it wasn't like a youthful indiscretion that he joined Al-Qaeda. The new head of Syria, who of course seized power just by brute force, and who's overseen the militias murdering Druze, Christians, and also people from minority Islamic sects in Syria. He had the red carpet rolled out for him at the Élysée the other month in Paris. But the current French government position is that Benjamin Netanyahu cannot set foot on French soil.
I saw that, yeah.
Which is now, this is preposterous to me, but that's just some context. The second thing to say, which is more important, is Macron, Carney, Starmer, and Albanese have all done this unilateral declaration of recognition of a non-existent state, a state that literally does not exist, and whose borders nobody has agreed on, and whose governance nobody knows. They've all done this for one reason, which is domestic political reasons.
I wondered about that.
if I was in Canada again the other week, and if you go to places like Montreal or Toronto, Vancouver, any major city, they are routinely shut down by unbelievably violent, virulent anti-Israel protesters. I say this because it's sort of still amazing to me as somebody who has perhaps an old-fashioned view of peaceful, nice, decent Canada. Jewish schools repeatedly fired at or firebombed, synagogues repeatedly either shot at or firebombed, Jews attacked. This is Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happened because Canada has allowed in a lot of people from Arab and Muslim countries, and they've brought this hatred that we were discussing earlier, these dislikes, these bigotries, they've brought them to Canada, and now they're exercising out on the streets of Canada. That's not all of the protesters at all. That's a very significant chunk of them. Same thing in Britain, same thing in Australia, same thing in France. And if people doubt that or think I'm being cynical or anything like that, just consider the fact that when these leaders all coordinated in order to do this the other day, in order to put pressure on Israel, I mean, it was, Macron even said as much. If you, Israel, don't do what we want, we will declare a Palestinian state.
Mm-hmm.
Hell of a way to start a country, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
As a threat. But the country that didn't do that in that moment was Italy. Giorgia Meloni did not join in. That she thought it was the wrong thing to do and would risk rewarding the terrorists. There were immediately not just protests, but riots, the smashing up of shops, and much more in Milan, because Meloni had not recognized a Palestinian state. That's what all these other leaders know they're facing domestically. They know that. Consider the fact that in the UK, where I'm from, we're speaking a few days after a terrorist called Jihad was decided to go and murder Jews on the festival of Yom Kippur in Manchester. In the wake of that, the Starmer government in the UK asked, for the first time ever, certainly the first time in 2 years, asked the planned anti-Israel protests 2 days later not to go ahead because it was a request. It was not an order. They made a polite request that they rethink the next day's, 2 days later, protest on this occasion because police were needed to up security at other synagogues, Jewish schools, other Jewish sites across the country, and that Jews in the UK, having just been the target of such a terrible attack, might be feeling intimidated
Mm-hmm.
by thousands of people again turning out on the streets calling for intifada, particularly globalize the intifada, one of their favorite chants. And the organizers of the protest said, no, we're going ahead.
Jeez.
Now that's, as I'm fond of pointing out, because it's important, that's not Israel's problem. That's Britain's problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if your synagogues and Jewish schools and yeshivas and so on are not safe in Canada, that is not Israel's problem. That's Canada's problem. And so on in each of these countries. But the trend for many years has been to not face up to problems that are difficult. And again, there's an obvious reason.
Functionally, what does recognizing a Palestinian state do? Because there's no elections, there's no government, there's no borders, really.
No, it does nothing.
So can they, if we have this huge problem in the United States or Canada, Australia, France, these governments theoretically could end up much more right-wing if people decide that they're sick of this kind of thing. I mean, the Muslim population is probably, I'm going to guess, mostly moderate in its single-digit number. eventually people are going to, I would think, end up shifting to the right and electing a government that says, oh, if you want to protest this and shoot at a synagogue, we're just going to deport you or something. I mean, you're going to end up with more and more right-wing governments. Can you unrecognize a state? How does that work?
Yes, it's like not believing in Santa Claus anymore.
and two, do you agree, or is my prediction feasible that these governments might end up shifting significantly to the right?
Yes.
Yeah.
More than feasible. More than feasible. They're making it almost inevitable. And by the way, one of all of this stuff is hell all the way down, as I said at the beginning. But there was a poll carried out last year, and I think on the anniversary of the 7th of October, said that most British Muslims don't believe that Hamas carried out atrocities on the 7th of October 2023.
Is that credible? That's insane.
Yes. The majority of them don't think Hamas did anything wrong.
I hate hearing that. I'd like to think...
Not good, is it?
No, because look, I went to school in Michigan, like I said, and there's all these... I was friends with tons of Muslim kids. They were all like nice and reasonable, and I didn't have to hide that I was Jewish, and I'm still friends with a lot of them. I don't think that they would say, "Oh, that didn't happen."
Well, my friend Eric Weinstein gave me a useful hack for this some years ago, which is to point out, if you don't think that Islam has a problem of fundamentalism, you don't have enough Muslim friends.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do have Muslim friends, you will know that this is something they know. And something which is a very lively and difficult thing going on in their community. And I've always had the same view. It's time that they sort their darn house out. We all have problems in our communities, in different religions. We all have problems. We've all had big problems in our past at some point, sometimes for a very long time. But you cannot tell me that if there was a sect of the Mormon church that was going around preaching the killing of another minority, we would expect our Mormon friends to face down that group.
That's true. Yeah.
And sure, there are crazy Christians, there are some crazy Jews, and there are some crazy atheists, and all this. Yeah, okay. But we would expect at the moment that violence was normalized, even by a single-digit percentage, or approved of by a low double-digit percentage of people, you would expect that group, whoever it was, to confront it head on and to say, no, we're not doing this. So why does that not happen more? And why is it that instead people have charges of Islamophobia and of far-right bigotry or of racism and so on? And I'm afraid it's to be my kindest in the interpretation of this, it's a demonstration that, like so many other groups and religions and sects, the Muslim world does not want to air its dirty laundry in public. It does not want to have this discussion publicly. It does not want to have it in particular with non-Muslims, and it wants it to go away, and it wants to demonize anyone who points to it, including Muslims.
It's interesting.
So, we saw how long it took, for instance, for the child sex abuse scandals in the Catholic Church to come out because of the unwillingness of seeing people right up the top of the hierarchy in the clergy to allow the church to be dragged through what was going to happen if this came out. And we had, we know the decades of cover-up. The Muslim world has that. And they are so far away, it seems, still, from actually facing up to that.
On that note, what do you think of the term or the word Islamophobic or Islamophobia? Because I understand what people mean when they say it, but somebody was conflating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, and I'm sympathetic to the argument that you can have legitimate criticism of Israel, and it doesn't mean you hate Jews. And people often will say, people misuse that on both sides.
Sure.
But the same people who kind of will die on that hill, of course, will also say that you're Islamophobic for having a conversation like this. And I find it interesting because it seems like kind of the same thing.
Well, they are similar in certain rhetorical ways. I don't think they're at all similar.
Let me clarify what I mean. I feel like the word Islamophobia it's not the same thing as racism. Like, you can have racism where you say, oh, you know, I don't like that people from these countries or whatever. That's racism. That's prejudice. Islamophobia seems like it's a made-up term to get you to not criticize Islamic.
It is a made-up term. It was made up by the Muslim Brotherhood some decades ago.
Can you explain that? I don't think people know that.
Yeah, it's a term, the Muslim Brotherhood, which is one of the most effective organizations, actually, of the latter half of the 20th century. They inserted this into the dialogue, and it really started to come to prominence in around the 1980s. And it was recognized. It was wheeled out because it was recognized by the Brotherhood and its affiliates to be a very useful way to cow, particularly Westerners who do not want to be seen as bigoted. Mm-hmm. We in our societies in the West fear the charge of bigotry. And so if somebody uses it against us, even falsely, it can have a terrible stain.
It's like pedophile.
Yes, it's like
pedophile. And
absolutely.
Like you're stuck defending yourself in this completely ridiculous.
And some of it will stick. So it has been used very cynically as a tactic. Now, because it's a recent invention, there's been a lot of muddying of the waters, and a lot of people don't realize what it is, and they don't really. You know, is it possible to criticize Israel without being anti-Semite? Yes. Is it possible to criticize any tenet of Islam or the behavior of any Muslim without being accused of Islamophobia? No. No. It's I mean, people think anti-Semitism is overused. Wait till they see Islamophobia. That is just, people get hosed down by that. And I reject it because, among other things, well, first of all, it's inexact as a term because a phobia is an irrational fear of something. And there's every reason to have a rational fear of aspects of Islam. Fundamentalist Islam is something one should be rationally fearful of, concerned about, worried about. The second thing is that it seems to me that it sets up an entirely impossible situation, which is if you are going to be accused of Islamophobia for criticizing, for instance, jihadism, Muslim radicalism, Muslim Brotherhood style activity, ISIS style activity, pointing out that groups like ISIS, groups like Hamas, they do quote Islamic scripture all the time, and they believe they have the correct interpretation of the Quran, Hadith, the life of Muhammad. Can you have any of that discussion without being accused of Islamophobia? No, not really. I mean, we've been trying for decades, and we in the West have been dancing around this. But, you know, you can be the most secular leftist French cartoonist showing that you are trying to have the right to ridicule the Muslim faith in the same way as you ridicule the Jewish faith and the Christian faith and all other things, and you'll be called an Islamophobe, and in the cases of Charlie Hebdo, you'll have your offices shot up and your staff murdered in Paris in 2015. Mm-hmm. This thing of turning rational, like, is it a phobia of cartoonists in Europe to worry about a man with a Kalashnikov coming through the door if you draw a cartoon that is said to offend the sensibilities of some Muslims? That's not an irrational fear. It's a totally rational fear. And once you go down from that, there's a whole set of other things which are totally rational fears. I have a completely rational fear of, for instance, what I see as being the accelerating backwards bigotries in societies that import very large numbers of people from certain Muslim cultures without integrating them, because I think that there are terrible problems that can come along with it. We in Britain had a very, very visceral one in recent decades with the rape gangs in the north of England, and not just in the north of England, but across England, which were gangs of Muslim men who were, it sounds like an obscene far-right fantasy, but oh no, it happened, where thousands of young white girls, many working class, were groomed and gang raped by men who were doing it because the girls were white and because they believed that they were, as famously been said, easy meat.
Mm.
And now, when we became aware of that, I remember this very, very clearly in the UK, when we became aware of that in the 2000s, the story was covered over because Muslim groups and others said it was Islamophobic. And Channel 4 and other media entities who, are left-wing, when they tried to look at the story, were accused of bigotry and Islamophobia and told to shut up. And when a left-wing Labour MP mentioned this, she was called a racist and an Islamophobe and told to shut up, even though this was happening to young girls in her own constituency. And when care workers got worried that children were disappearing from the care homes, they were told to shut up because they were Islamophobic, and so on and so on. So, yes, people can use all sorts of terms to try to shut down their opponents or their critics. And we have lived through a period where that has been done with enormous liberality by a lot of people who have called anyone they don't like racist, anyone they don't like misogynistic, or anyone they don't like homophobic or transphobic or whatever. We've got a long period of the name calling. And some of it has been very effective, and some of it has been deliberately disingenuous. And I think the Islamophobia one is one example of that. The effects of that are terrible. And by the way, the inevitable effect of all of that, going back to your point about possibility of electing actually far-right governments, or certainly governments with much stricter, perhaps potentially unpleasant policies, is the same thing. This stuff has been thrown around so much that people don't believe it anymore.
It's tough. I mean, look, if Donald Trump can arrest people who are here undocumented and essentially deport them to a country outside of the United States, or that might not even be their own country, it can easily happen. I mean, we've seen worse things happen in Europe in the last century anyway.
Well, the most likely thing is that, the populations, particularly in Europe, will be pushed to so much unhappiness about this that they snap in some way. And we've seen little glimpses of that, and it's very unpleasant, very, very ugly. And that's why when there's some people who occasionally become well known, mainly online. There's one, I won't name him, but who is an activist in Birmingham in the UK, a Muslim activist, and he was once again on video recently saying, we're not here to integrate, we're here to take over. And I watched that, and I don't think, oh gosh, you're such a tough guy. I just think, you effing idiot, you have no idea. Or at least, or maybe you do have an idea, which makes you even worse, of what you're actually doing. What you're trying to do is you're trying to needle the country that's hosted you and allowed you and your parents and your siblings in. You are needling them and hoping that they are going to react in a way that can make you say, aha, I told you. Such a stupid and irresponsible thing to do.
It's extremely cynical, because these guys will not be on the front lines of whatever conflict they spark, most likely. They'll be the ones making TikTok videos about it, but they will not be the ones whose houses are burned down. They'll be vacationing abroad, coincidentally, when this all goes down.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're probably right.
Is it the case that Europe is just absorbing more immigration than it can handle? I mean,
Yes.
Is that really what it is?
Yeah, I wrote about this 10 years ago in my book, Strange Death of Europe. It all boils down to one thing, which is that Europe, much like America in recent years, and certainly Canada, did two things. We vastly underestimated the number of people who wanted to come to our countries, and we vastly overestimated our ability to integrate them. Integration is the world's least exact science. In fact, it's not a science. It's a sort of hope.
Yeah.
And nobody really knows how to do it well. All you can do is have a moderate, sensible immigration policy with low enough numbers from similar enough societies, and kind of hope it goes along okay. And that's not what Europe has done.
No.
We've just, I'm afraid it's, I think it's a rather bleak future in Europe in the short term.
It sure seems that way. I grew up in Michigan. We had Russians, Polish people, Jews, Germans. I'm probably forgetting a couple dozen different groups that I grew up with. And then in other parts of town, we have Dearborn, which is like the largest collection of Middle Easterners outside of the Middle East. So it's everyone from Lebanese, Egyptian. I mean, it's just everybody. And there's a lot of assimilation, but there's also just a lot of. It seems like as time has gone on, there's less so. I mean, I can't tell you. My whole family and all their friends grew up Polish. Not one of them, I mean, maybe one or two of them spoke Polish. Maybe they kind of understand a little bit of it. They'll say they're Polish if someone asks. They'll have dinner at the Polish American Club if there's a wedding or some kind of birthday party. It's not the first thing on the business card. But I've seen even now Dearborn, where I had a ton of friends grow up. They were Muslim, but it was kind of like, we have different holidays. Now it's like, this is my whole personality.
Yeah, because I'm afraid it's something I'm very familiar with because, for instance, I saw the other day there was a video of a council in Dearborn, a council meeting, in which a member of the public, happened to be a white man, objected to the fact that one of the streets locally was going to be named after a dead Hezbollah terrorist.
Yeah.
Not good. I mean, it's not good at the point at which you're naming your streets after terrorists. And when this man objected to this, the Muslim council member said, you should leave this place. We don't want you here. You're a bigot. You're an Islamophobe. And again, you think, it seems to me to be very unwise to say to an American from an area, if you are from a community that has very recently moved in, F off, bigot. It's like, don't do that. You don't know what you're going to awaken. But I'm afraid that what I'm familiar with in it is that what happened in Dearborn is the same thing that's happened in multiple cities I know across Europe, including in Britain. It's to do with what I always call the three things about the immigration. It's about the speed of immigration, the numbers you allow in, and the identity of the people you allow in. And if you allow in a lot of people who are similar to you culturally or have the same presuppositions about the nature of the society, and if you do it slowly and you do it in moderate numbers, they will integrate over time. But if you bring in large numbers of people from very disparate cultures very swiftly, they will not integrate, and in fact, they're more likely to stick together, not learn the language, not want to integrate because why would I? I've got my community and it's getting stronger and more visible, and that's why in America, as in Europe, we now have openly sectarian politicking of the kind that I think Zohran Mamdani has played to, that Ilhan Omar has played to. I think that stuff is shocking or bewildering a lot of Americans who don't quite realize what is going on. But I just point to them to many cases of this in Britain and Europe because it's very, very familiar terrain.
So this is probably a dumb question, but this is worse now, right? This is not me imagining when I was a kid that everything was a little bit more moderate and better, because that's what it seems like to me. That's why I keep bringing up these examples. Like my best friend was Amir Shahida. We ate dinner on the floor. I said it was weird. His parents said no, we'd just do different things and it's fine and we're all Americans, yada, and his dad became a doctor. I mean, it's like it all just seemed very normal to have this melting pot of different people and they all became Americans and we were all happy with that. Or am I delusional because I was 10 years old?
Well, you certainly wouldn't have been fully formed as an intellectual being at 10, I'm sure. But I think that I think your perception is correct. But I think that there are two things that have happened simultaneously. One is the subject we were just talking about. The other is the turning on the American story, which has happened in your lifetime and my lifetime. And it's again replicated from the turning in Britain against the British story, the turning in Europe against the European story, the turning in Canada against the Canadian story, and the turning in Australia against the Australian story. All of these societies that are suffering these pangs and pains from the migration policies of recent governments of left and right are are also going through a period of self-abnegation. That is, the turning from their national story, our national stories, from a story of heroism and pride into one of shame. And that is very recent. And there's a pleasant way you could spin it, which is, as more people come into our societies, we are welcoming societies. By the way, that's why people come, in part, not entirely, but in part. Nobody is trying to break into the Communist Party of China's terrain.
Generally not. Yeah.
Nobody is trying to break into Sudan for a good life.
North Korea, people usually go in one direction.
Right. So it is actually the case, and we should recognize it, and it is an evidence of our decency that we are correctly perceived to be people who, for instance, do care if we're accused of racism or bigotry. We do care if we're accused of being jingoistic or something. But so the sort of the nicest interpretation of why this has happened is we wanted to be able to absorb people from a very wide array of backgrounds. And so what we did was effectively dilute our national identity and culture a bit, dampen it down a bit in order to be more embracing. And that's the nicest characterization of it, which is possible. It's only possible with some people, just like decent, well-minded, liberals, you know. You don't want to embarrass the other guy. You particularly don't want to embarrass the other guy if he's arrived recently and your society is going gangbusters and his is disaster zone. You don't want to be the person saying, "Look how great we are," you know, and all sorts of things. There's a sort of but the problem is actually that moved in recent decades from what I've described as the approach of self-criticism, which I believe to be a very good thing and a very important thing in our societies, that we seek to evolve, we seek to improve. We've moved from a position of self-criticism into one of self-hatred. And that is why, I mean, what Elon Musk famously described as the woke mind virus being, you know, your child comes home from school and is learning about the founding fathers, is asked about Thomas Jefferson, what do you know, slave owner, anything else? No. That's the woke mind virus. That's the self-abnegation. That's the self-hatred. And as I've also said for some time, it's not clear to me that a society that doesn't like its past has any future. And we should think really carefully about this. If people are brought up to believe the society they're from is the worst society going, and I can think of a lot of young Americans, particularly of college age, who I've spoken to who really do believe that. Mm-hmm. They're like, it's so bad here. I'd like to turn over the whole thing, burn it all down, because it can't be worse. Mm-hmm. Like, you want to bet? You've no darn idea what it could be like. But that attitude of self-hatred, and it's not quite self-hatred because the people who feel intense self-regard at the same time, because they're the ones who are the keepers of the true flame in some way, the ones who are uniquely self-flagellating, the world champions at self-flagellation, except really they're beating the crap out of someone else and not themselves. Mm-hmm. They've managed to keep their own egos perfectly well. But that attitude is profoundly destructive. And it's perfectly obvious also you can't integrate anyone into a society that hates itself, because why would you? If I moved to a country that seemed to be working much better than my own country of origin, and I discovered that the country in question wanted itself to be beaten the hell out of and had forgotten its safe word, I don't know why I wouldn't join in the flagellating of them. Mm-hmm. Or just think, God, you're all pathetic and awful. I'm going to do my own thing. Yeah,
that's completely understandable. That's well put and completely understandable. It reminds me, I did a live show. This not in person, but like a live radio broadcast using some app a few years ago. And I remember talking about going to North Korea a few years ago and running tours there, and then talking about Iran, and this guy who he called in and said, "Isn't it a little ethnocentric?" The thing I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you're putting judgment on the way that the Iranian government is run by the Ayatollahs and the North Korean government." Ethnocentric. I didn't realize it was up for debate that the United States didn't have a better system than North Korea and extreme theocratic Iran. I didn't realize that was like sort of my first. I had never heard anybody make that argument.
That caller thinks he's being incredibly culturally adept.
Sure,
he thinks he's being like the of cultural,
right.
And it's sort of spilt Saidism and a bit more. But again, I've seen this now all my adult life. There was a famous occasion when the debate was going on in 2001-2 about toppling the Taliban in response to 9/11 and the harboring of al-Qaeda terrorists in Afghanistan. The now late, sadly, novelist Martin Amis, late of Brooklyn most recently, was at an event in London, and so late 2001, early 2002, and sort of exquisitely artistic, cultured audience of the British mainstream left and so on. And Martin Amis said, "Put your hand up if you feel morally superior to the Taliban."
Did no one raise their hand?
I think one person raised their hand. And his point was, but this is a group that, put aside for a moment harboring al-Qaeda, this is a group that stones women to death for alleged adultery, does child bride marriage, does, lopping off the arms and legs of people accused of theft, beheads, and why can't you feel better than them?
Right.
And the reason is that simply by that point, and this is not everybody in society, thank God there are people who've not been poorly miseducated, as so many people have in our societies, but there are a large number of people, and they do have disproportionate cultural impact in our countries, who really do think it would be the most appalling thing imaginable to be so morally presumptuous as to think that you're better than the Taliban.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you say, oh, well, we've all done our, it's a terrible thing. I mean, look at the, and so on.
Right. It's the equivalent in the United States is, well, they don't have freedom of speech in North Korea. Oh, well, we're trying to ban TikTok. So, 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
You see that all the time. You see that all the time. It comes from a deep, it comes in its best form, as opposed to the self-flagellating form. It comes from a desire not to be seen to be somehow tub thumping, flag shagging.
You got to remember that.
It's sort of, it's a putative attempt at welcoming the world without realizing that the rest of the world does not share the cultural presuppositions that have got you to the place where you're worried that the world might think of you in that way.
Right. Yeah. If you want to welcome something strange, start with stinky cheese from France. You don't have to bring in Islamic fundamentalism.
Big fan of the stinky cheese, and I believe in the advance of less pasteurized cheeses into the United States of America.
Cheese aside, is assimilation still possible, or is multiculturalism now just kind of inevitably the norm forever?
My belief is that it is possible, but we don't know in what numbers and with whom and where. But I do think that what Rusty Reno, the editor of the Catholic magazine First Things, has described as the return of the strong gods, feels to me at the moment to be kind of inevitable. And what that means is that the integration, multiculturalism thing has so visibly not worked to the extent that we hoped it would. It can be over-egged to the extent to which it's been a failure, because it hasn't been a total failure. It had some successes. But it's been, if you end up wanting to sort of work out the swings and the roundabouts, or the pluses and the minuses, my suspicion is that a lot of people are seeing more minuses than pluses. They're not, for instance, in the UK at the moment, thrilled that the UK should have brought in Jihad al-Shami's family from Syria, and that Jihad was the son's name, possibly a giveaway. Maybe we don't need a lot more jihads. And that his father celebrated October the 7th and so on. More people this week than last week will be thinking in the UK, you know, I'm not sure if we needed the dad and the rest of the family because they gave us literally jihad. Mm-hmm. And I mention this because, as I say, going back to Reno's point, I think in that situation when the softer gods fail, people go to the harder gods. And they're there. And there are different versions of it. There are religious versions of it. I think you can see it in an element of Christian revivalism in the United States. And I think you can see it in elements of Jewish revivalism in the United States. I think that you also see it in a sort of resurgent rebellion against the cultures of self-abnegation. I think you see it it's likely to see a rise of not just nationalism, but ethno-nationalism. And that's because people will revert to those things. They will revert to strong gods when the weaker ones have proven themselves not to have any power.
It's a good place to put it down. What do you think?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
It's a great pleasure to be with you.